Welcome everybody. My name is Tigor Rumiani. I'm talking from the NGO branch at the United Nations in New York. First of all, before I begin, I want to make sure that everybody can listen to me okay. And there are some people that from time to time we can listen to them. It's very important that everybody keep their microphone off. So always keep the microphone off. At some point later in the webinar, you'll have the chance to speak. So, because if you start speaking, then the voice will be confused with my voice, and then it will be, people will not be able to listen to me. So please, for the next 30 minutes or so, I'll appreciate if you keep the mic off, and then from that moment, we will explain how to give the floor to everybody. So welcome again, and thank you very much for everybody for joining us here in the morning in New York, and we know that we have people from all over the world, and that's great. We really want participants from everywhere and applicants from everywhere that are interested in the possibility to apply and to eventually work with ECOSOC. My name, as I said, is Diego Rumiani. I work here in the NGO branch, which is part of the Department of Economic and Social Affairs of the United Nations. And this presentation that I'm going to give is going to take about 30 minutes. So after that presentation, you will be able to interact in the way of asking questions, either by taking the floor or in writing. Questions can be written in writing at any time. So you have a way to access your chat, and you can send a message in the chat to the NGO branch, the user NGO branch, who will be compiling all your questions. And then after the 30 minutes, I'll be going through some of the questions. We will probably not have time to pick up all the questions, but I'll try to make a good selection of questions so we cover most of the common issues and problems and doubts in applying for consultative status with ECOSOC. So I'll appreciate you can start writing from now on. Again, please don't take the floor. Don't turn on your mic, because that will be problematic for the communication. So let's start. The presentation will imply basically three areas. The first area, I will very quickly go through what is consultative status, which I'm sure many of you already know about it because you already expressed interest in applying, or you're already applying, or in the process of finishing your application. So we're going to talk a little bit about what consultative status is, which organizations are eligible for it, and most important than anything else is what are the benefits, why you should apply for consultative status. The second part will be a little bit more technical into the application process. So we'll explain the process from the moment of applying from consultative status, from submitting your application, all the way until your application is reviewed first here in the NGO branch and ultimately in the Committee on NGOs, which is part of ECOSOC, and in ECOSOC itself. So after that, we will be covering the whole process of your application. Finally, the third part of this process is the main components of the application package. Sorry, is it okay? You listen to me okay? Yeah. So the application process of the application package, all the components, we're going to go through most of them. I mean, we're not going to go question by question, but just to be aware of what are the things you have to look for in filling out the questionnaire, looking a little bit at how to do it online, and it's not going to be a step-by-step process of how to do every single thing, but we'll go for the most common issues that you're going to find in filling out the questionnaire. Okay, so that's the plan for today, and then we'll start. So the first question is, what is consultative status, which is the reason why I guess most of you are here. And consultative status is a relationship that was established, it existed in different names and fashion before 1996, but in 1996 it was established as a specific relationship between the Economic and Social Council, which is one of the bodies of the United Nations dealing, the main body dealing with economic and social affairs, and particularly now as part of the development agenda with the Sustainable Development Goals, and NGO, civil society around the world. This association became formal in 1996, and it's still the same procedure we use it since then. And right now we have about 4,500 approximately NGOs that are currently in consultative status with ECOSOC, which is, as you can see, a large number, and and this number is continuously increased because there is a lot of interest in getting more and more involved with the work of ECOSOC, either through the commissions that ECOSOC celebrate in the first half of the year, or the plenary meetings even that happen during the first mostly in July, but also there are some in April and May and in other moments in the year. So that's basically this consultative relationship. And in consultative relation, the most important thing you have to get from it is not really an association that you just subscribe to any type of publication or information you get from the UN, but is really a call for participate. You know, the ECOSOC needs NGO to get involved in the implementation of the SDGs and in the big development agenda plan of the United Nations. So that's why there is a lot of opportunities for NGOs to get involved in the work of the UN and to have a voice in the work of the UN and to attend meetings and you know, many ways of participating. So what are the benefits? You know, one of the first things before even opening the application for you to think is what I'm going to be contributing. What are the things that I'm going to get out of this association? Well, I like to separate this between two areas. One is the formal, more formal one, and the other more informal. The formal are all established in one resolution that is called ECOSOC Resolution 1996/31, and this resolution regulates all this relationship between civil society and the UN and ECOSOC in particular. The formal participation, the main participation is as soon as you get consultative status, you are given a ground pass to attend UN meetings, definitely in all the areas in which ECOSOC, in all the parts of the world where ECOSOC has meetings, which is mostly in Geneva, New York, and Vienna, but also in other offices around the world. And with that, you can basically attend all meetings of ECOSOC, which otherwise not any other NGO will be able to attend, or any other entity. Only entities that have this type of association with ECOSOC will be able to attend to this meeting. So this ground pass is very valuable. But also it's not only attending meetings, but also participating in meetings. And participating in meetings will allow you to either write statements that can be presented to the ECOSOC and be part of the compendium of all the participation of that meeting, so it will have an official value in UN deliberations. And also speaking at ECOSOC. Many commissions and more are having chances to allow NGOs to participate, to speak, you know. There are many NGOs, as you can imagine, 4,500, it's a large number, so not all of them can speak, but in some commissions, many NGOs manage to speak, and this is also very valuable. It's something NGOs tend to appreciate a lot because they allow us to share their experiences, share their view, which is what basically the UN is looking forward behind this association, is to hear the voices of NGOs in this information. The other ways of participating are more informal, but sometimes equally or even more valuable. Being in the UN and being in this deliberation for some NGOs allow us to interact with other civil society members, but also government officials, delegations that are present in the UN, and UN officials who are actually members of different of the entities of the UN family. So this interaction could enable them to really have an interaction to to share their projects, to even come up with new partnerships that usually come up from this interaction. That's very important and for NGOs. The other thing that you can do is organize what we call side events. So in the context of many of the commissions, many commissions even call for NGOs to work and prepare meetings that they will be chairing to share their project or to discuss a particular topic of the agenda of that commission. And this is very, very popular. Commission Status of Women, Commission on Social Development, the Forum of Indigenous Issues. Many of these commissions of ECOSOC attracts a large number of NGOs, and these NGOs usually have the chance to speak. So this is really very, very important. So these are some of the benefits, and of course the interaction and the possibility to go around the UN is always very valuable for many NGOs, and that's something you have to take into consideration after you get your consultative status, also to plan what is really what you want to get out of this association. So let's talk about the application process now. The application process, many of you, I imagine, already submitted the application or they are in the process of submitting. Some of you maybe are considering it, and this webinar, hopefully the idea is to make up your mind of whether this is really for your NGO, this is you're really interested or ready to apply. So the process, the applications are received throughout the year. So you can submit an application at any time. However, we have this June 1st deadline, which we are announcing and advertising everywhere to make sure NGOs really know that the June 1st deadline is important. Now, why is important? Why we put a deadline of June 1st? Well, even though we accept applications throughout the year, the June 1st deadline is important because only applications submitted before this June 1st, or by this June 1st, actually, will be evaluated by the committee during the 2018 session. So that means next year. All applications submitted after June 1st, so from June 1st, this June 1st, 2017 until June 1st, 2018, they are going to be evaluated already in the 2019 session. So it's very important to submit it in terms of the timing, not in terms of opportunity or in terms of anything else, but it's in terms of timing. If you want to get your consultative status as early as possible, to do it before this June 1st. And in that we are working to make sure everybody who submit their application can be moved to the committee and get their status as soon as possible. So let's see what is the path that these applications follow since their application. So let's say I'm an NGO and I apply right now. I submit an application right now. So I fulfill all requirements, and we're going to talk a little bit about this. And I decide to submit an application. I complete the application form. I submit all the documents, and I submit it today, May 5th at least, here in New York. So the application will be first reviewed by the NGO branch, and we basically do a technical review in which we look at what is missing, what other elements are confusing, or we need further clarifications, this type of evaluation, and we're going to be contacting with you. All the communication is done electronically. We have a messaging system for which we communicate, and I'm sure some of you are already using it. So please, this is the place where we're going to be communicating with you, and eventually, after this back and forth, when we feel your application is ready to go, we submit it to the NGO committee. Now, this NGO committee, I mentioned it many times. It's a committee that is part of ECOSOC, so it's one of the commissions of subsidiary bodies of ECOSOC. And it meets twice a year. It meets in January, it meets in May. Of course, the earliest you can get there, the better, but this also has to do with the number of applications we receive every year, and we do receive a lot. Like last year, we got more than 700 applications. So it's this year we don't know. Until June 1st we cannot tell, but we are foreseeing even a bigger number than that. So based on the number, we try to allocate applicants into the January and the May session. So when the application goes to the committee is composed of 19 member states and a chair, who usually is a member of one of these member states, and basically they go one by one, they look at the applications, and they ask questions to the NGO. So if I'm the chair, I'm going to consider application of the organization X, Y, and Z, and they're going to say, okay, we have the application here. Anybody has any question about this application? And if nobody has any question, which is hopefully the best case scenario, means your application is clear, they know what you do, they really understand all the documentation, then you are recommended for consultative status. That's the first step in getting consultative status. So you don't get consultative status in that January or May session, but you are recommended for getting a consultative status. So this recommendation is very important. It's basically one step before getting it. And the reason why you get recommended is because the Committee on NGOs cannot make that decision. The Committee on NGO is a committee, but is the plenary, all the composition, the full composition of ECOSOC, who will be making that decision. And that will happen either in April, if you were submitted in the January committee, or in May, if you were submitted in July, if you were submitted in the May committee. So that means that if I apply right now, the earliest I can get consultative status, and this is usually a question I usually receive, what is the, assuming everything goes smooth, what is the earliest I can get consultative status, will be April. So if your application gets to January, and January goes well, then April will be the earliest date in which, April I'm talking about obviously next year, will be the date in which you will be, the moment in which you will get consultative status, you will be granted consultative status. At that moment you have all the full privileges I was mentioning before, ground passes, possibility to speak, submit written statement, participate in meetings, organize eventually meetings, all this work you can do with the UN and particularly with ECOSOC. So that's I first do the best case scenario, but unfortunately for some NGOs things are getting a little bit more difficult, and committee usually ask questions to NGOs, and these questions you will get will be during the meeting transmitted to you. So you're invited to attend the meeting, but it's really not necessary. I mean, it's because in some cases it implies traveling to New York. The committee is always held in New York. So we really not encouraging NGOs to really travel specifically for the meeting. Of course, if you can do it, you're welcome to do it, and we will really make sure of getting the ground passes in the UN to get into the meeting. But it's not really necessary. And the whole process of if you get any question, these questions will be transmitted to you electronically, even if you are here. So this back and forth with the committee is the committee meets for around 7 to 8 days. So this back and forth with the committee may take a while. And if the committee cannot make a decision with information you received during that period, then what happens is what we call a deferment of your case. So your application is deferred to the next session. So if you, let's say, got in January, you got a question, you answer, maybe you got another question, the committee don't have more time to consider your case because of this time limitation, your case will be deferred automatically to May. And in May, the same thing will happen, and hopefully, we want your cases to get a consultative status soon, but if the delegations have questions, they can keep deferring your cases. So that's very important for you to be on top of your case, not only after you submit it and in our interaction with the NGO branch, but more important, in the interaction with the NGO committee, because they are the ones who ultimately will decide to recommend you or not. So that's very important in terms of handling deferments in the NGO committee. Okay, so the last aspect I want to talk in terms of the application process is the components, what you have to submit. One aspect is the eligibility. So 1996-31 is pretty wide in terms of which NGOs can be accepted. Actually, there is no much definition. So we really accept a large number of type of NGOs or type of organizations. I'm not going to talk about specific types. If you have any question about your organization, and maybe we can address it here. But always you can write to us through this messaging system, which, by the way, you can access by going to the NGO branch website and clicking on Contact Us. And there you can ask any questions that come up from this webinar or any other question you may think about the process. But the eligibility is very open. The only thing that I will say is very important is that your organization has been in existence for 2 years. This is something that there's no way to overcome. If you just created your organization, or even last year, and we will be asking you to prove that your organization is more than 2 years, and for that we will ask for governmental documentation. And if we are not able to prove, unfortunately, we are not able to process your application. At least at this moment, you will be able to reapply later and when you are eligible. But this is a very, if you want, a strong requirement in terms of organizations. There are other requirements, and they are written in our website. I'm not going to go one by one, but having a democratic constitution, having a financial statement or financial records that we can evaluate, etc. There are many other elements, but the 2 years is very important, and we put this very much in advance because some NGOs, they just were created and they heard about this possibility and they apply, and unfortunately we cannot allow them to move forward. So that's something for you to be aware of. So for the rest, I'm gonna go. Basically, I'm gonna share a little bit of the website and see a little bit. We're gonna do some kind of a step-by-step way. So let's see. I'm basically gonna share the web browser I have here. Okay, so hopefully you will be seeing here my browser, and I'm checking with my colleagues to see if you can see my browser. Thank you. Okay, it's okay now?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. All right, so here we are going to the NGO branch website, and here you can see many of you probably came here. Many of you actually had to register to this webinar through here, so hopefully I'm not saying something you never saw before. One important thing for questions and about anything of this webinar or the application process in general, I'm going to quickly show you. Please go to this option, Contact Us, Contact Us, and this link that I'm highlighting here, follow this link to ask us a question now, will give you the steps to send us a question. And we try to answer, as you can imagine, with 700 applicants. It's a lot of people consulting issues and sharing different concerns. We'll try to respond as much as possible. Please send all your questions to the application for consultative status category. So when you come here, you will see a place where you have to select a category. Please select application for consultative status. We have other issues. Our branch, a lot of administrative expenditures. You want to do an effort to associate everything to projects. This is very important because you don't want the NGO to look like it's only doing administrative stuff. Otherwise, you're gonna get a question. You're gonna get a question from the committee members about that. So again, there are many hints about this. I'll recommend you to visit them. You can see the one we put here, which more detail explain what I'm saying. please be aware of this when deciding what numbers to put. Numbers are very important. Are difficult to explain because you just put a number and that's it. Any clarification about numbers, we strongly encourage NGOs to put it right down here. And write as many as you need, because committee members will look at it and understand some of the numbers thanks to your explanation. So this is also a good place to really explain things in terms of financial information. Finally, and with this I will conclude this presentation, we have the document section. And the document section are the 3 required documents that you require to present. I'm going to talk a little bit about this. So the first document that you have to present is, it says here, certificate of registration, but it's actually a proof of existence that it has to be issued by a governmental authority that proves that your organization has been in existence for these 2 years in the country or whatever the document is certifying. There are many questions about the issue of the proof of existence. I'm not going to cover all of them because there's very much. We are welcome to ask questions here, if there is no time later in your particular case. But in cases, for instance, a common case that we receive is NGOs that don't have any type of registration with their countries and therefore they don't have any proof of existence. They need to secure some kind of proof of existence, which usually is, in many countries, NGOs are tax exempt. So this tax exemption, which is usually obtained from the tax authority, it's a good element, it's a good document because it is issued by the government. But the requirement is that it has to be issued by a governmental authority. There are other cases as well. The document has to be presented, the original, and if this original is not either in English or French, as you may know, we accept applications in English and French. Unfortunately, these are the working language of the UN, and unfortunately the other languages or the official languages are not accepted, but English and French. And this document has to have a translation, if it's not in English or French, into English or French. The Constitution has to, and it sometimes in some countries is called by laws or statutes or charter. We don't care so much about the name it has, we care about what it contains. And we want to have a very clear explanation of a governance structure and the decision-making process. Usually these documents follow a standard format, but of course this can change from country to country. And this standard format contains that information. But if you're not following a standard format, and if it contains that information, we accept it anyway. Similarly, if this document, we don't need the original of this document, so as long as you give us a copy either translated or the original in English and French, we are fine. Finally, the financial statement. And the financial statement, we want, financial statement is basically, some NGOs have to generate it for third parties or donors. So if you have that documentation already, you just have to pick that. It has to be a recent financial statement. We request 2 years before the moment in which you apply. And the financial statement has to have at least an income statement and a balance sheet. Those are the 2 elements that we require for the financial statement. And just as like the Constitution, we need the element of the English or French. Could be a translation, doesn't need to be original, but we need it to have it in English or French. So remember, all this documentation and the application form has to be in English and French so delegations can process, because this is the working language of the United Nations. Okay, so with this I conclude a really fast, but I hope comprehensive nonetheless, review of the process of applying, of what is consultative status, and also on the components of things that you really have to put your hands on to submit, and many of you I know are already submitting. I asked in writing. Okay, and I'll try to answer, I'll try to mix, I want also to hear you, I don't want to be the only one talking here. and I'll mix with what you have. And at this moment, if you want to speak, you have a button say raise your hand. Again, we cannot promise you're many over there, but we cannot promise all of you will be speaking. We pick totally randomly. And hopefully, please, if I read your question, I appreciate you lower your hand or don't raise it, so we allow other people to speak. So let me see what we have here. Okay, just let me. Okay, so let me see. Okay, so here we have a question about ECOSOC status and to change it from roster to general or special. Let me tell you a little bit about that. For the ones you don't know, there are three types of consultative status, and this consultative status, this type is decided by the committee. And to say it quickly, ECOSOC, the committee decides based on your organization which status to give you. Quickly, roster, special status is the most common one. Out of the 4,500, I don't know, maybe 3,000 have special consultative status, maybe even more. And basically it's for NGOs that are working on a particular area of the work of ECOSOC, on one specific area, usually, education, health, you name it. But one particular area, and they have a narrow coverage, usually a country, maybe two countries, but not a global coverage. General status is for NGOs who do have a global coverage, and also usually they work on many areas of ECOSOC. So they may work on health, but also they do things on education, they do things on other issues. So this type of NGOs it's a limited group. We probably have around 200, no more than that. And usually these are big NGOs established at a global level. And if you go and search in our database for NGOs with general consultative status, you will find many familiar names because these are NGOs that are usually well known. Roster is a classification that is NGOs who have no direct relevance, usually, to ECOSOC, or at least they were given status for anyway, even though they are not totally related to ECOSOC. There are other type of roster status, but I don't want to get so detail into it. But these NGOs, ECOSOC wants them in because eventually their participation could be useful. They want them to participate in some form because they usually have some specific or technical expertise that could be useful to the work of ECOSOC. So those are roster. The process to apply to move from roster to general or special is not that easy because you have to submit another application. So this is for people who are already in one of these categories. There is an option when you go to submit an application that is it says submit a reclassification. So it's actually in the same system. I'm not going to go through it now because we really don't receive so many of those. But if you have a particular issue, you can submit it right now. You don't need our permission or anything for us to do. But you can definitely submit it, or you can write, and we provide instructions on how to do it in detail for your particular case if this is what you wish to do. This, of course, just as any other application, will be reviewed by us, will go to the committee, and will be either recommended or deferred depending on if there are questions or the committee consider that the status you aspire to, you are not really ready for that, or you are not fulfill the eligibility for that. Okay, so let me see other questions here. Let me see. Okay, I have a question here that says if you would like to know whether it's impossible to fill in the application during a certain period, like a week, and go back to already filled in sections. Yes, you can start the application, stop it, do something else, you can keep it there if you want forever. You can always come back and complete it. Just make sure it's saved The screens have a timeout, I think right now of, I don't remember that exactly, but I think it's 10 to 20 minutes. So if you don't do anything and you didn't save for 10 or 20 minutes, then yes, you're going to lose that, but just, you know, be sure to save from time to time. And yes, you can complete it. As long as the application is not submitted, you can always complete the application. You can always continue working on it. Okay, let me see another question, and then I'll go to the floor. Let me see. Okay, so I'll move to another question. I'm reading here. Okay, here I have several questions. So the first question, is it compulsory for accreditation to be mainly funded through private funds and sector? We kind of addressed that by saying you can be funded by the government partially, or you can be funded by other sources. The only thing, and even funding from private sector, you have to, the issue of funding is always independence. You always want to be sure that the funding, you always want to you always have to be funded by actually any type of organization, as long as you prove the independency from that organization. Because one of the things that committee is aware is that the NGO is independent. So if you're funded from the private sector, you can also be dependent on the private sector, and that's something you would like to justify, especially if it is a lot of a big amount of money that you're receiving from the funding sector. So there is no compulsion. You can write really whatever you want in terms of the funding, but you just have to be aware of the justifications you have to make, because otherwise you'll get a question from the committee, and that question from the committee will actually create delays in your application. You don't really want questions. That's basically the goal in your application. You have to anticipate to these questions. There is questions about foundations, if they can have accreditation. The answer is yes. There is no restriction in 1996-31, so there is no problem. Again, if these foundations are funded completely from private funds, or a private company, for instance, from private sector, well, you need to justify a little bit there what's the problem. You know, what could be the problem? Like you are independent, that the objectives of the private company, which is always a for-profit objective, is not doesn't influence the decision-making process of your organization. Okay, then let me see the last one. I'll go to okay, the translation, if they have to be official. So translations don't have to be official. So all translations, you can do it yourself if you want. I know translation usually takes time and takes money if you make it official, and basically this is a process that we don't charge for. This process. It should be totally free. It's not free because it takes time, but at least you don't have to have extra expenditures to carry on this project. So translation don't have to be official, and you can do the translation yourself or someone who is really not an official translator. Okay, so I'll switch now to see if someone wants to take the floor, and maybe I can, let me see, I see several people here. So I'm gonna pick, okay, I see someone with a name. I'm asking my colleagues here to give them the floor. Erica. And again, okay. Okay, Erica, you have the floor. Oh. Sorry, I was without mic.
Okay.
Tell me.
I was wondering if organizations have been working already with other NGOs, if this is helpful for their application.
Let me repeat the question, see if I get it. So if you say if the fact of working with other NGOs could be helpful, right?
In terms of having already created statements and interventions.
Right. Well, it's hard to say. I mean, it depends on the how can I put it, the reference that committee members who are going to be judging your application is depending on this on the reference they have about this NGO, whether this is going to be beneficial or not. So it's of course good that you show that you already been either working with these NGOs and these NGOs working with the UN, because it shows that you have familiarity with the UN processes and you already are involved in the processes, in the work of ECOSOC. However, you have to be aware that usually they're going to evaluate any name of any entity that you put in your application is part of your evaluation. So if a particular country didn't have a good experience or doesn't have a good opinion about that NGO, this may or may not affect you. So this is something you have to do. Now, if you do it and you put it in your website and you are advertising anywhere, of course it's something you cannot not put it because it's public. Just be aware that this is the consequence. So if you want to work, my advice is if you're gonna establish or disclose this relationship, do it, but put exactly what kind of relationship you have and what are the limitations of this relationship. Like you work with them, but on this particular project or for this particular objective. This is something part of what you have to think about your convenience. But in terms of working with the UN, yes, committee members like to see that you are already involved with the UN and you already know you're going to get consultative status and you know what to do. You already have a plan. Does answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
No problem, thank you. Okay, I'm going to take someone else. Again, please, the ones who are raising the hand is probably not, I expect not the ones I just answered. So if you did it and maybe you forgot, just lower it. Okay, I'm going to get John Providence. And I'm asking my colleagues to, John Providence. And I'm asking my colleagues to give the floor. Okay, you have the floor, John. You have the floor? Okay, I think he left. Okay, so we go now to, let me try someone else. Lorena Morales Vidal. You have the floor now.
I was wondering about which are the obligations for the NGOs that get this.
Sorry, can you repeat that question you want to know about?
What are the obligations for the NGOs after you get the status? The NGOs have to submit annual report or make any other contribution to UN. I was wondering about the obligations after an NGO gets.
Very good, and thank you for asking that question because it's something I didn't cover, but it's very important. Consultative status doesn't end when you just get it. You know, actually it's a relationship, and then there is rights and benefits you can get, but there are also obligations. The obligation you have is the submission of what we call quadrennial reports. So every 4 years, NGOs who get consultative status, they are obliged to submit a report. This report is a short report which should tell what the NGO has been doing in the last 4 years. So it talks about, it has some defined questions already. It's not complicated. Basically, if you was any change in organization of your organizational change in the NGO, what are the activities you did to contribute to the UN and to contribute in particular to the SDGs, and I think that's pretty much it. There are 2 other questions, but I don't remember right now, that really define if you don't submit this application, this quadrennial report every 4 years, you risk the possibility of first get suspended for 1 year, and eventually after that 1 year, if you still don't submit it, losing their consultative status. So so that's why it's very important to be on top of that. Okay, I hope this answer. I'll move now to another one. Let me see. Okay, I'll go one more and I will read a little bit more. I'll go to Bindia. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Bindia or Bindia. Bindia, you have your floor.
Yeah, I would like to know that we had submitted the ECOSOC application form.
Yes.
And we didn't receive any response of what our status was last year.
Okay, for this particular case, I mean, I'm going to give you a general explanation, but probably you'll need to follow up with us through a message if you haven't done yet. The general. Sorry?
We have applied and contacted to contact us and also messaged.
Okay.
But we have been getting an auto reply saying that you have not, be careful, check whether you have submitted. And we had taken screenshots of when we did the submission last year.
Okay. Unfortunately, I cannot look in this webinar at the particular case because, you know, for the sake of time of the other colleagues. However, if you send a screenshot and if you send information and they tell you, I mean, many NGOs sometimes contact us because submitting the profile, which is the first part of the NGO, the application, is not submitting the application. You have to submit everything and then receive an automatic notification saying your application is submitted. That's the general question I can ask you. The best question would be if I actually go to your application and look exactly what happened. But this is something that definitely my colleagues can do. If you haven't, one thing I can recommend you to do is, I mean, if you're already in contact with them, then that's fine. If you want to send another message, say that you were already, you know, we discussed this in the webinar, and then we can take it from there.